All right, let's dive into a part of international relations that's totally fascinating but often flies under the radar. We're talking about diplomacy that happens away from the spotlight, run by groups that have a major voice on the world stage but don't actually have a country to call their own.
So picture this for a second. You've got a political group with tons of international support, powerful allies, a really clear mission, but zero territory, no land. Does all their diplomatic power just evaporate? Does their voice just get silenced? Well, the answer is a huge, resounding no. You see, diplomacy is way more resilient and creative than we give it credit for. It adapts, and in these situations, it tends to morph into three really interesting forms: observer status, governments in exile, and national liberation movements. Each one is a totally different way to influence the world without a state. Okay, first up, let's talk about the observers. Think of this as getting a seat at the big table. You're in the room where it all happens, even if you don't get a final say on the decisions being made. So what exactly is observer status? Basically, it's an official designation that a big international organization, like the UN, gives to a non-member. It's kind of like a hall pass that lets you participate, be heard, and engage with all the major players. And this is where it gets really interesting. As an observer, you get some pretty significant powers. You can speak at meetings, attend important sessions, even help draft resolutions. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. You cannot vote. Your power comes from persuasion, from being present, not from having a formal say. All right, moving on to our second category, and this one is a real mind-bender. Governments in exile. Just try to wrap your head around this. A group that is, for all intents and purposes, a country's legitimate government, but it's forced to operate from a completely different country. It's a total paradox, right? A government in exile holds the legal claim to rule a nation, but they're physically cut off from it. They're basically a government running on hope, memory, and the dream of one day going home. So how do they keep that claim alive? Well, their legitimacy is built on a few really important pillars. They usually argue that they're the legal continuation of a previous legitimate government. They run their own diplomatic offices, they work around the clock to get support from other nations, and everything they do is geared toward that eventual return to power. And that brings us to our third and final form, which is probably the most dynamic of them all: national liberation movements. See, if governments in exile are about getting a state back, liberation movements are about building a brand new one from the ground up, with diplomacy as their number one tool. A national liberation movement is really the political heart of a people's struggle for independence. Their goal is crystal clear: to achieve self-determination and transform their cause into a recognized sovereign country. And there's often a pretty clear playbook for how they do it. It all starts with using diplomacy to be seen as legitimate. From there, they open up representative offices abroad. Think of them as mini embassies. They use those to build a coalition of international support. And if they're successful, that's the springboard to becoming a real, recognized government. Okay, so let's just pull this all together for a second. You've got three groups with three different goals, right? Observers just want to influence. Governments in exile want to regain control. And liberation movements want to achieve statehood. Each one gets its power from a different place, and each one has a major limitation that defines its struggle. So, we've gone through the definitions, but what's the big deal? Why does any of this shadow diplomacy actually matter? Well, because it has a huge, tangible impact on how our world works. Make no mistake, the status these groups fight for is anything but symbolic. It's not just about getting a fancy title, it translates directly into real power, the power to actually shape global events. And you can see their fingerprints everywhere. They are at the table influencing peace processes that end wars. Their testimony helps shape international sanctions. They negotiate access for life-saving humanitarian aid into conflict zones. They can even have a hand in writing the global treaties that affect all of us. It really all boils down to this fundamental truth. Diplomacy isn't just for states. It's a living, breathing thing that continues through the fight for recognition, the act of representation, and the spirit of resistance, with or without territory. So I'll leave you with this to think about. If diplomacy, which we think of as a core function of a country, can actually thrive without land, what does that tell us about what a nation really is today? Maybe it's not just about borders on a map, but about a shared voice and a common will to be heard.